Quiet on set. Speed and action.
I don't want to be a product of my environment. I want my environment to be a product of me.
Welcome to the Foot and Friends on Film podcast, discussing everything about cinema. Now here's your host, Nick Baylor.
Here's Johnny. I think of a man, and I take away reason and accountability. You can't handle the truth. And wait till they get a load of me.
Welcome to the official podcast of Foot and Friends on Film.com, where we discuss everything about cinema. I'm your host, Nick Mailer. On episode 5, today we're talking about Jack, and that means Mr. Nicholson, one of the greatest icons of the big screen. Everything from Easy Rider to The Departed and beyond. It's going to be a good one. Make sure to take your seats and grab your popcorn. It's time for your feature presentation. As mentioned, we are the official podcast of Foot and Friends on Film.com, where our motto is, any film you have not seen is a new experience. This podcast contains mature subject matter and may not be suitable for all audiences. As we do each week, we get on the phone with our namesake and founder. We're talking about Jack. So, please welcome John H. Foote. So we're here today to talk about Jack Nicholson, a legend of the big screen. Nicholson, notoriously evasive when it comes to press and the media, and one of the few interviews you've never been able to snag, correct?
Very true. Very true. 30 years of film criticism, and I've never interviewed Jack Nicholson, which I'd love to do, obviously. Pardon?
Sorry, did you ever come close?
Yeah, I came close a few times, but never managed to do it. And of all the actors I've interviewed, he would be the one I'd like to interview most.
He recently spoke out about the death of Kobe Bryant, fellow Oscar winner Kobe Bryant. Nicholson, for those who may not know, massive Los Angeles Lakers basketball fan, can often be seen courtside at the games. Yeah. Do you recall seeing the short Dear Basketball that Kobe won his Oscar for?
I did. It was very good. It was kind of a love letter to basketball, something for his daughter to look at, in future generations. And really no surprise that Kobe Bryant was going to get into movies. I suspect had he lived, he would have ended up producing several more films.
Well, obviously a tragic event. Not only himself, but his young daughter and some others were killed in a helicopter crash.
Yes.
John Joseph Nicholson was born in April of 1937. And he has a massive career that spans several decades. What can you tell us about? Actually, no, I want to bring this up. He has an interesting story, which is similar to that of another hero of mine, Eric Clapton, in that Jack Nicholson was born to a 17-year-old showgirl, and he was raised under the impression that his mother was actually his sister.
Yes.
How do you think that affected his personality? Do you think it was, I think it wasn't until years later that he found out, correct?
It was actually the 70s when he found out, after he'd, become established as a leading man after his first couple of Oscar nominations. And I think it made him very guarded to relationships, to people. He was notorious for loaning money, but he also wanted to be paid back. I think it just made him very cautious of people taking advantage of him, because the person supposedly closest to him lied to him for many years. And it might have been, in her mind, it might have been a good lie, but really it wasn't, because his grandmother raised him. His grandmother was his mother. And when you think about that, that's pretty unkind. That's a pretty unkind thing for the two of them to try and pull off. And I do think it affected Nicholson very much in how much he trusted people. I think the person he has trusted most in his life has been his best friend, Warren Beatty. Very few others get into the inner circle of Jack.
You can imagine the kind of issues one would have with identity and trust. And I know, again, like for Eric Clapton, it had a massive effect on him, made him very introverted and reserved and hard to trust people.
Yes.
So Jack Nicholson had a brief stint in the military as a young man.
Yeah, very, very brief.
He joined the California Air National Guard, a move sometimes characterized as an effort to dodge the draft.
Yes.
But he was discharged at the end of his enlistment in 1962, and he came to Hollywood in 1954, first when he was 17, and took a job as an office worker for William Hanna and Joseph Barbera. Trained as an actor with a group called the Players Ring Theater, and made his film debut in a low-budget teen drama, The Crybaby Killer, 1958.
Yes.
He then became familiar with Roger Corman.
Mm-hmm.
And the earliest performance I've seen of Nicholson's was as the masochistic dental patient in Little Shop of Horrors.
Yeah, he was terrific in that. He made quite a few films for Corman. He became friends with Boris Karloff, the great Universal horror star of all people, and made The Terror and The Raven, and was given a lot of fairly choice parts from Roger Corman in these low-budget films, but he could never really seem to break through as an actor, and became recognized more so as a writer. And Nicholson was actually one of the creators of the rock group The Monkees. He was very involved in the early development of the TV show, the selection of the band, and then he wrote the screenplay to their feature film Head in 1966, and was pretty much going to carry on as a writer until he got involved in some other films in 67 and 68.
He wrote the screenplay for The Trip.
Yes.
Directed by Corman, starring Peter Fonda and Dennis Hopper.
Yes.
We might as well talk about Easy Rider.
Well, yeah, he became good friends with Dennis Hopper and Peter Fonda, and they went off to make Easy Rider. They had $500,000 to make this biker movie that really nobody believed in, but they thought these two hippies, these two kids, one of them Henry Fonda's son, it might make a few bucks. And as they started filming it, Rip Torn, the actor hired to play George Hansen, the lawyer, was fired, and Nicholson stepped in. And when Easy Rider was released, it was an immediate sensation, legendary from the day it opened. And the best reviews in the film went to Jack Nicholson as this goofy Southern lawyer, George Hansen, who's anti-establishment in every way and is doomed. He ends up being killed in the film. Foolishly, there's no real reason for his death. It's a cold-blooded murder, but lets you know that the 60s were that time when hippies were being slaughtered for no particular reason. And he won the New York Film Critics Award for Best Supporting Actor. He was nominated for his first Academy Award, and a star was born in 1969 with Jack Nicholson. That was the film that brought Hollywood's attention to him and let them know this guy's the real deal. A late bloomer for sure, but bloom he did.
And in the following 2 years, he hit the ground running. He made 6 films between 1970 and 1971.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. The best of them, which was 5 Easy Pieces. He met Bob Rafelson, who was involved with real serious type of movies that Hollywood had just started to make with the new American cinema that emerged in 1967. And 5 Easy Pieces, he portrays a gifted musician from a wealthy family of musicians who wants nothing to do with music or the family. He ends up working a blue-collar job on an oil rig, and is called home when his father has a stroke and has to go through the motions of facing a family he really does despise all over again. He takes his, for lack of a better term, redneck girlfriend with him, portrayed by Karen Black, beautifully played by Karen Black. and lets the family know what type of life he's living. And they're obviously ashamed of him, but he's equally ashamed of them and their pretentiousness. And at the end of the film, Bobby DePia, his character, hitches a ride with an oil rig, leaves Karen Black behind in a restaurant, and continues to drift, just continues to bounce around America as he probably will for the rest of his life. And it was a wonderful performance that immediately established Nicholson as the 70s anti-hero, the anti-establishment anti-hero, who was always going to buck the establishment and do his own thing in every way.
He first worked with Mike Nichols in '71 in a film called Carnal Knowledge.
Yes, yes. Interesting movie. He plays a misogynistic bastard for all intents and purposes, uses women mercilessly, and really has no respect for anybody, including himself, and has a very telling moment at the end where he's showing the slides of all the women he slept with to his best friend, and up pops his best friend's girlfriend on one of the slides, which Nicholson quickly carries on from, but the damage is done. His character, Jonathan, was just a lousy human being in general, but because it was Nicholson, you cared for him. There was a vulnerability there that very few actors could have pulled off, and it drew audiences directly to his character. The film was not a box office success. Critics were kind of split on it, but no one was confused about Nicholson. Everybody loved his work.
A Safe Place, 1971, considered a critical and box office disaster.
Yes, absolutely. It's a film that's very difficult to get even today on Blu-ray and DVD. Just a bomb in every way, a bomb. Directed by Henry Jaglom, and not even worth talking about, Nick. It's just one of those movies that everybody involved is ashamed of. Nicholson most of all. Just never should have been made.
Right. I only bring it up because, it's important to discuss highs and lows. It's not
Absolutely.
it's not like it really hindered him too much. It would appear. The Last Detail came in 1973, directed by Hal Ashby.
Yeah, but we should mention The King of Marvin Gardens just before that. He made that in '72 with his good friend Bruce Dern. They were best friends at that time for Bob Raffleson, and they played complete opposites of what they were as people. Dern was the big brash huckster looking for the next score, and Nicholson was this shy radio host, and they were wonderful together. The film didn't make a dime, but it was critically acclaimed and is still considered, among his best work, certainly among Bruce Dern's best work, which led directly to The Last Detail, directed by Hal Ashby, which is a signature Jack Nicholson performance. He plays Billy Badass Badusky. He's a lifetime sailor, and he's given an order to take a young man to the brig for a ridiculous crime. This kid is given 8 years for stealing a donations box. And Nicholson knows what jail's going to do to this kid, so he and his friend decide they'll give him one big blowout weekend before they take him to jail. And they do. They take him to a hooker, they take him to bars, they teach him to send food back when he's not happy. They give him all this confidence and courage until the kid tries to escape. And they catch him and do indeed take him off to jail. But they made a man out of him and had a good time in doing it. And it's just a spectacular piece of acting from Nicholson. He won the Cannes Film Festival Award and the New York Film Critics Award for Best Actor. He was nominated for an Oscar. Everyone expected him to win, and then Jack Lemmon won for Save the Tiger, which shocked Hollywood, shocked everyone.
The hits kept rolling. In 1974, he starred in Chinatown,
which is still one of the greatest films ever made. Certainly the greatest film noir ever created. He plays J.J. Gittes, a very cocky but whip-smart private investigator who is drawn into just a labyrinth of incest and hell when he's employed by Evelyn Mulwray, played by Faye Dunaway, who wants to find out who killed her husband. And as he gets deeper and deeper involved with Miss Mulwray, sleeping with her, he discovers that she has been raped by her father and bore a child by her father. And John Huston, the great film director, plays Noah Cross in the movie, and he's an absolute reptile in this film, just a despicable human being. And Nicholson, again, a gigantic performance. Everyone expected him to win the Academy Award. It was nominated for 11. Now it ran into the juggernaut that was The Godfather Part 2, but still, people thought Nicholson would defeat Al Pacino for the Oscar. And incredibly, Art Carney won the Oscar that year for Harry and Tonto, defeating two of the greatest performances given in American film history: Nicholson in Chinatown and Pacino in The Godfather Part Two. I mean, I've never gotten over it. I watched the Oscars that night, and I was stunned, absolutely stunned, when one of them didn't win.
Who would you have given it to?
I'd give it to Pacino. I'd give the edge to Pacino. I think it's his best work. I always have thought that. I love Nicholson in Chinatown, but his best work was yet to come.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I don't think Pacino's ever surpassed what he did in Godfather Part 2. Subject for another episode.
Absolutely.
In 1975, Nicholson appeared in 4 movies. He appeared in the rock musical Tommy, Fortune, The Passenger, and of course, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Yeah, he was a busy guy in 75. Very small part in Tommy, but he sang and he pulled it off. He played the doctor who had eyes for Tommy's mother, played by Anne Margaret. No surprise. The Passenger was directed by Antonioni and is a very strange movie, very muted film, but interesting to watch. The Fortune was a box office failure, but I quite liked it. I thought Nicholson was hysterical in it. And paired with Warren Beatty, they had a lovely chemistry together. And it was Stockard Channing's film debut, and kind of a lost movie when it comes to the 70s. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is the greatest performance Nicholson has ever given. He plays R.P. McMurphy, a convict who pretends that he's mentally ill so he can be sent to a mental institution where he figures he can play cards and goof around all day. He doesn't realize that he's been committed. They can keep him there until they're ready to let him go. And once there, he runs into Nurse Ratched, who delights in emasculating and metaphorically castrating men. And she's done it to the entire ward. And Nicholson, or McMurphy, makes a bet with the men that he can break Ratched. And he sets about trying to do it. And he nearly does, but he fails. And at the end of the film, he's lobotomized, and his friend, Chief Bromden, suffocates him, setting him free, again, metaphorically, and smashes through the window, escaping. And the men think that McMurphy has escaped. He changed their lives in that he gave them the courage to stand up to the nurse and to realize that they did not have to be there. There was a whole world out there that they could be a part of. His performance in the movie is absolutely breathtaking. It's one of the purest performance of pure genius I've ever seen. And finally, he won his Oscar. In fact, it won all 5 major Academy Awards, and every acting award available that year for an actor went to Jack Nicholson.
Yeah, Best Picture, Director, Actor, Actress, and Screenplay.
Yes, and richly deserved. Just a masterful film.
Brilliant movie. In 1976, Nicholson starred in The Missouri Breaks and The Last Tycoon.
Yeah, The Missouri Breaks was looked at with such anticipation. It starred Marlon Brando and Jack Nicholson. And the trailer for this, treated it as a movie event. These two great actors were going to be paired together at last in a Western directed by Arthur Penn. And I went to see it opening day. It was my birthday. My friends took me to see it. And it was such a strange, peculiar movie. I like it, and I like it to this day, but I'm not sure what the hell Marlon Brando's up to in the movie. His accent's all over the place. His character is Looney Tunes, and he's a vicious murderer. Nicholson is a decent cowboy trying to get out of the life of crime and live a life, but he's in the sights of this madman, and he doesn't know how to get out of it. And it's a very beautiful film to look at. Nicholson's terrific, and it's got an alarming, jarring ending where he cuts Brando's throat, and we see Brando wake out of a dead sleep and his eyes open, and we see Nicholson's face above him, and he says, "Do you know what woke you? You just had your throat cut." And Brando's eyes, they go wide as he realizes he's dying. And it was a shocking ending to kind of a languid movie where not a lot of action happens, but interesting. You can't take your eyes off the screen. The Last Tycoon was a supporting role. He wanted to work with Elia Kazan, the great director from the 50s, who came back to adapt F. Scott Fitzgerald's last unfinished novel to the screen. And he's the best thing in it. It just doesn't work. Robert De Niro's not a romantic lead. He never was. He never will be. but he's got this terrific scene with Nicholson, who plays a labor leader trying to get unions set up in the movie studio, and it's by far the best scene in the film. Other than that, there's not much in the movie except nice costumes and art direction.
Right. Going South, Western comedy directed by and starring Nicholson.
Yeah, this is the first time I realized that when Nicholson didn't have a good director to control him, he could go wildly over the top. And he does. He goes so far over the top in this movie, it's almost embarrassing. There was a 30s and 40s actor named Gabby Hayes who was comic relief in a lot of these great Westerns. And to me, that's who Nicholson is doing in Going South. He's overdoing Gabby Hayes. And I was embarrassed for him. I was embarrassed. The film was awful. John Belushi's in it, wasted. Christopher Lloyd's in it, wasted. And Nicholson himself is, it's just a bad piece of acting. And again, he directed this, and he's directed a few films, but he's never had the kind of directorial career his buddy Warren Beatty has had. Nicholson just can't seem to create that great masterpiece I think he wants to create. The one thing that did come out of this movie was Mary Steenburgen. She's wonderful in it, and Nicholson handpicked her to play the part and put her on the path of stardom. She won an Oscar 2 years later in Melvin and Howard.
A good friend of mine, one of my best friends actually, he got into a new relationship this past year, and when I met the young lady, I was sort of summing her up as the best friend, and I go to one of my first tests for anyone new who I meet, and I say, "What's your favorite movie?" Quick, and she, without hesitating, said The Shining.
A lot of people say The Shining, Nick.
Yeah, but that's a good answer.
It is. It is. Again, I saw The Shining with my brother opening day. We couldn't wait to see it. We were both huge Kubrick fans and Nicholson fans. And we listened to the audience around us laughing at Nicholson's antics on screen, coming through the door screaming, "Here's Johnny." His scene in the bar with Lloyd, where he's talking about how angry he gets. And we kept thinking, what are they laughing about? None of this is funny. And when he comes through the door screaming, "Here's Johnny," the camera's on Shelley Duvall, and the terror on her face is what they should have been feeling. When Stanley Kubrick made a movie, he demanded that his audience experience the film, and he wanted them placed in the movie. And if you're Shelley Duvall in that movie, that's not funny. He's coming through that door with an axe, and he's got murder on the mind. Nicholson was absolutely brilliant in The Shining. It's a towering performance, and it walks the line. He almost goes over the top a few times, but he always pulls it back in. It's a wonderful performance about a descent into absolute madness, and he's a terrifying presence in that movie from beginning to end, and you can't take your eyes off him. Just a monumental movie, way ahead of its time. Critics beat it up when it was released in 1980, but it's since become it's a modern classic. It's one of the great films of all time.
Notable amongst those who are not fans of the movie is Stephen King.
Yeah, but Stephen King has to realize, and I've written this, when a book is sold to Stanley Kubrick, it's no longer a Stephen King novel. It's going to be a Stanley Kubrick film.
Right.
And yes, he changed it drastically. And I love the book. I would love to see an honorable version of the book, but I liked what Kubrick did in this film. They tried to do a TV miniseries, a loyal adaptation of the book for television, and it was awful because you're thinking of Nicholson, you're thinking of Shelley Duvall and Scatman Crothers. They're so locked into your mind after seeing the film.
Mm-hmm. 1981 brought The Postman Always Rings Twice and Reds.
Yeah, two terrific films. Postman Always Rings Twice is a remake of the 1946 film with John Garfield as the Nicholson character, and I really liked it. Critics didn't like it; it was a box office failure. But Nicholson, together with Jessica Lange, was electric, and they had such extraordinary sexual chemistry. And it was interesting to see an actress blow Nicholson off the screen, and that's exactly what Jessica Lange did. She was such a presence and a character in this movie. You couldn't take your eyes off her. She walked across the screen and your eyes were on her. And their first scene together, where they come together sexually, is such a charged, angry moment. And the two of them are just so committed to the scene and the characters. Again, you can't take your eyes off of it. And Nicholson knew that Lang was blowing him off the screen, and he was happy to be a part of it. He said, the gal's in the zone, let her go. And she went. How she was not nominated for an Oscar, I still don't know. But he was terrific too. I mean, he played off her beautifully and was quite happy to be a secondary character. When Warren Beatty was casting Reds, his biggest problem was to find an actor who could play Eugene O'Neill, the great playwright, who stole his girlfriend from him for a short time. And Nicholson said to him, well, the only guy that could do that's me. And Beatty said, you're absolutely right. So he cast him as Eugene O'Neill. And Nicholson, it's a supporting role, but Nicholson is brilliant. Eugene O'Neill was a very sexual creature, and his poems and his plays had sexual undertones all the way through it. And he really dove into the human experience. Long Day's Journey into Night is one of the greatest plays I've ever read to this day, a remarkable piece. And Nicholson is superb as Eugene O'Neill in this big, brilliant movie, Reds, which deals with John Reed and Louise Bryant covering the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia in 1917. Beatty deservedly won the Academy Award for Best Director. He was nominated for Best Actor, Diane Keaton for Actress, Nicholson for Supporting Actor, and Maureen Stapleton won for Supporting Actress. It had 12 nominations, but won just 3. It was bested for Best Picture by Chariots of Fire, which I never understood. Never understood.
I can hear the music in my head.
And, you know, the music's terrific, and that opening scene on the beach is wonderful, but that's it. That's the movie.
Any thoughts on The Border, 1982?
Interesting little movie, directed by Tony Richardson. Nicholson is great in it, but he's surrounded by a bunch of bad performances. Valerie Perrine, who was so good in Lenny in 1974, is just awful as his wife. You just can't imagine what he ever saw in her to marry her. Nicholson plays kind of a heroic guy. He's a border guard who knows that there's a ring of child abductions happening, and he helps a young Mexican girl get her baby back. And it's got some lovely moments where he meets the girl and he brings the baby back to her. But that's it. I mean, it's Nicholson's movie from beginning to end. Nobody else really makes an impression. And Perrine is unwatchable. She makes the film, turns it into this screeching, horrible character that you really don't want anything to do with. So it came and went pretty quick.
In 1983, Nicholson made a film with James L. Brooks that would lead to another Academy Award. Talk about Terms of Endearment.
Terms of Endearment is probably the best film ever made about mothers and daughters. And they have a different relationship to mothers and sons and fathers and sons. And in this film, Shirley MacLaine and Deborah Winger have that relationship, very contentious, yet when something goes wrong, when the chips are down, they're there for each other. Nicholson plays Garrett Breedlove, a famous astronaut who lives next door and is famous for his affairs with women 20 years younger than he. And he enters into an affair with Shirley MacLaine's character, Aurora Greenway, and Aurora falls in love with him. And Nicholson just isn't the type to stay attached, and they separate. But when Emma, the Deborah Winger character, gets cancer, MacLaine is taking care of her in Texas, and Nicholson shows up. And MacLaine says the line in the movie that I think defines Nicholson's character to perfection. She sees him, goes to him, hugs him, and says to him, "Who would have expected you to be a nice guy?" And she just as easily could have been talking about Jack Nicholson. Who would expect Nicholson to be a decent man? And that's what he is in this film, and completely deserved the Academy Award. The film won 5. James L. Brooks' film debut wins Best Picture, Director, Actress for Shirley MacLaine. Nicholson, Supporting Actor and Screenplay. Deborah Winger was nominated, could have just as easily won. And Nicholson won every supporting award available to him that year. The New York Critics, LA, Golden Globe, everything. Just one of his most acclaimed and most liked performances.
Nicholson was absent from the screen in 84, but in 85, he made Prizzi's Honor with John Huston.
Yeah, and this is a great movie. Everybody didn't quite know what to expect with Prizzi's Honor because the book is so dramatic. But John Huston chose to make it as a black comedy, and it was a perfect choice. And I howled all the way through it the first time I saw it, and people were looking at me like I was out of my mind. But I was watching it correctly. They weren't. And when people got the joke, they realized it. Nicholson plays Charlie Partana, the hitman for the mob, and he's not terribly bright. And he marries a hit woman, and they end up with contracts on each other. And his performance, it was the first time Nicholson had really spoke with a thick Brooklyn accent. And the fact that he's playing a character not too bright was interesting because Nicholson himself is very intelligent, laser intelligent. And most of his characters are like that too. They can read people better than the people can read themselves. Look at McMurphy in Cuckoo's Nest. He reads the nurse, but he doesn't read her far enough, and it costs him his life. Charlie can't read anybody. He knows if he gets a deal that he's got to go kill them. That's it. That's it. And wonderful movie. He again was nominated for an Oscar. The film was nominated for 8. He again won the New York Film Critics Award for Best Actor and several other awards. And again, one of his bravest performances and most acclaimed performances.
In '86, he reunited with Mike Nichols for a movie called Heartburn. Any thoughts?
Just didn't work. We talked about this with Meryl Streep the other night. He had a day to prepare. He replaced Mandy Patinkin and stepped in the next day. He wasn't ready. He didn't really care about the character. He was playing Carl Bernstein, the Washington Post reporter that uncovered Watergate. That's the character he was playing. And wasn't him. It just wasn't him. The movie was very much Streep's movie, and he didn't have enough time to connect with Streep. They had no chemistry whatsoever. And yet a year later, when they made Ironweed, they had great chemistry. They gave legendary performances in that movie, both Oscar nominated, again, richly deserved, and light years away from Heartburn.
The Witches of Eastwick.
Good fun, nothing more. He plays the devil, and 3 witches, Cher, Susan Sarandon, and Michelle Pfeiffer, discover that they can conquer him together. They can't do it separately because he's too powerful, but together they can conquer him. And his goal is to impregnate all 3 of them, which he does, and raise little devils. And it's a lot of fun. It's good fun watching Jack Nicholson play Satan and have a great time doing it. But it's not a very good movie. I mean, it's got a stupid ending where he grows into this huge creature, and just dumb eventually.
Getting into my territory now. 1989, when they finally decided to make a mature Batman movie, they perfectly cast the Dark Knight's arch nemesis when Jack Nicholson portrayed the Joker in Tim Burton's Batman.
When Tim Burton was announced as a director for Batman, nobody complained. When Tim Burton announced he was casting Michael Keaton as Batman, there were howls of protest.
Yeah.
And then he announced that Nicholson was going to play the Joker, and everybody shut up because they figured even if Keaton blows it, Nicholson will be worth watching. And Keaton didn't blow it. Keaton was a terrific Bruce Wayne and a terrific Batman. And Nicholson chewed up every scene he was in as the Joker. Now that we've seen Heath Ledger's Joker and Jared Leto's Joker, and this year Joaquin Phoenix's Joker, Nicholson's is not at the top of the heap. I would say it's the 3rd best of the Jokers that I've seen. But the movie made him famous to a whole new generation of movie fans. And right now, there's a lot of 20-year-old kids, like right now in 2020, who don't know who Jack Nicholson is because he hasn't made a movie for 10 years, and they haven't seen enough of his films to really know who he was. But in 1989, an entire new generation of moviegoer was introduced to Jack Nicholson, not just in Batman in theaters, but when Batman came to home video, it was a sell-through. $25, you could own a VHS copy of the movie. So it was huge in reestablishing his presence in American cinema for that whole generation.
In Batman, they took inspiration from Alan Moore's graphic novel, The Killing Joke, for the Joker's origin story. The part about falling in the vat of chemicals and having the skin bleached, all of that was taken from that story. Burton sort of gave him an original backstory. He was already a gangster. They gave him a name, Jack Napier.
Yep.
Napier is an homage to Alan Napier, who portrayed Alfred Pennyworth on the '66 Bill Dozier Batman TV show. One thing I've always thought, I was doing a podcast with some friends called Geeks with Kids, and it was an entire episode dedicated to Batman. And they were asking me who's the best Batman, and it's, to me, I think with the Batman and Joker, it's been the appropriate actor for that movie or property or universe individually. Like, Michael Keaton was the perfect Batman for Tim Burton, and Nicholson, sure, he's been surpassed by some brilliant performances of that character, but still damn good.
His is a brilliant performance. I mean, he's sensational as the Joker. He's so good. A lot of people thought the film should have been called Joker.
Right.
That's how terrific he was. But you're right. Most of the guys that have played those parts have been perfect for that particular film. I didn't mind Val Kilmer as Batman in Batman Forever, and I loved Jim Carrey as the Riddler. So there've been some interesting casting choices through the years.
One thing I never really understood about Batman was the prosthetic smile. I didn't really understand the point of that because Jack Nicholson has such a pronounced grin anyway. I thought they could have done without that, but that's just me.
I think they went with it. Nicholson's idea was that the chemicals molded the smile in place, and he wanted to. There's an old silent film called The Man Who Laughs,
right?
And that was Nicholson's idea to go with something like that, a perma-smile. So that's his call.
Right. The Man Who Laughs actually was one of the original inspirations for the Joker when Bob Kane, Jerry Robinson, and Bill Finger created the character.
Yes.
One thing I always thought was I love the scene where he is defacing all the artwork to the Prince song "Party Man."
Yeah, pure indulgence. Just Nicholson having a blast.
You can tell he was really having fun with that character.
He loved making the movie. He loved every minute of it.
One thing I thought that was interesting is there's a great scene where Batman comes in and saves the girl and whooshes her out of the room, and Joker just looks at him. He says, "Where does he get those wonderful toys?"
Yeah.
And then in 2005, Christopher Nolan spent an entire movie answering that question.
Yes.
So after he does Batman, he decides to direct a sequel to Chinatown.
That had been going on for a long time. The script for The Two Jakes had kicked around Hollywood for years. And at one point, Sidney Lumet was going to direct it. At another point, Martin Scorsese had looked at it. Robert Towne was even going to direct it. And then finally Nicholson said, you know what, I'll do it. If this is how we get it done, let's do it. Robert Evans, the great producer and former head of Paramount, was going to play the other Jake in the movie. But his acting was so bad, the actresses in the film were laughing at him. And Nicholson replaced those actresses because he thought it was rude, but he also replaced Robert Evans. And eventually Harvey Keitel played him. And when the film was made, it's a good movie. It's just not a great movie. We find out J.J. Gittes went to war during the Second World War, was a war hero, came back and has taken care of that incestuous daughter of Faye Dunaway's since, making sure she was protected and kept out of sight. But it's really not about anything. It doesn't really have a narrative that drives like Chinatown drove. And I don't know why anybody would want to make a sequel to Chinatown. At one point, someone said it was going to be a trilogy. Why? It was such a great standalone movie to even try to repeat or replicate what Roman Polanski did. And I'm not a Roman Polanski fan. I loved what he did with Chinatown as a person. No thanks. But I don't know why Nicholson decided to direct it. He made a good effort. It's a handsome movie, but it just doesn't work.
Nicholson is an actor who's endlessly quotable for many of his movies, but one of his most famous quotes is, "You can't handle the truth."
Yeah. Yeah, A Few Good Men was a wonderful stage play and was snapped up immediately by Rob Reiner, who knew that he could have a box office hit with it. He cast Tom Cruise, Kevin Bacon, and for the plum role of Colonel Jessup, Jack Nicholson. And they knew that final court scene was going to be the one that brought the audiences in. He's terrific in it. He's sinister, he's insidious, he's corrupted by power, and he sees himself going all the way to the White House. That's the kind of guy this is. And that final scene in the courtroom is legendary. Anybody that ever says Tom Cruise can't act, I show them this clip because he goes toe to toe with the very best in the business, Jack Nicholson, and does just fine. Nicholson owns the movie, he owns the scene, but Cruise does just great. Nicholson was nominated for supporting actor. He lost that year to his friend Gene Hackman in Unforgiven, and he was okay with that. So, again, a brilliant performance. That same year, he directed a movie called Hoffa, or rather starred in a film called Hoffa, directed by Danny DeVito, which was a biography of labor leader Jimmy Hoffa. And he was deeply, deeply disappointed that critics didn't like it, it didn't make any money, and that he wasn't nominated for an Oscar. Critics didn't like the film. They loved him. He was terrific in it. He captured exactly who Jimmy Hoffa is or was, the same as Al Pacino's done this year in The Irishman. It's really worth a look to go back and check it out. I watched it again after The Irishman to see if there are any similarities in the performances. And the greatest similarity is that they each play the bombast that Jimmy Hoffa had. And a real passion project that just didn't work out for him.
Apparently one of Nicholson's favorite roles of his own. I'm looking forward to actually going back and checking out that movie since I've watched The Irishman 10
Yeah,
times.
it's worth a look. It's worth a look.
Backing up just a minute, I have to say, pardon my French, but anyone who says Tom Cruise can't act is a fucking idiot.
Wow, I agree. I agree. His work in Magnolia, The Last Samurai, Jerry Maguire, Color of Money, he's more than proved himself. Tropic Thunder.
Collateral.
Yeah, just enough. Enough. He's more than proven himself. He's got nothing to apologize for. He's one of the finest young actors in movies.
I've often said that, there's a difference between a quote unquote actor and a movie star. He's a great actor, but I think he's the greatest movie star in the world.
He's absolutely one of them. And Nicholson was the same at one point with Batman. He was the same. He was the biggest star in the world and the greatest actor, and everybody knew it.
Nicholson working with Mike Nichols again in '94, a film called Wolf.
Yeah, another one that just didn't work. A box office disaster and a horrible movie. Nicholson plays a man who changes into a werewolf, and it's got some real goofy scenes. He urinates all over James Spader, marking his territory. I've seen the movie 3 times, and that's the only single frame I remember is that scene. It's that forgettable. And these are not untalented people. Nicholson, Mike Nichols, Michelle Pfeiffer, these are great artists, and they just made a lousy movie. It seemed to come on the heels of Bram Stoker's Dracula, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, so they decided to make Wolf, and they shouldn't have. This is one that they just should have left alone.
In '95, Nicholson was directed by Sean Penn in The Crossing Guard.
Yeah, really good film. Really good film. Sean Penn had directed in 1991. He made a film called The Indian Runner with Viggo Mortensen and David Morse based on a Bruce Springsteen song. And in '95, he invited Nicholson to play Freddie in The Crossing Guard. And he plays a jeweler who has had his life turned upside down by the death of his daughter, killed by a drunk driver. And he's waiting for that man to be released from prison so he can kill him. It's broken his marriage up, and it's caused Freddie to be a laughingstock, an older man who goes to stripper bars and hangs out. It's a really powerful performance, and the scene in the graveyard at the end of the film is heartbreaking. It also brought together Angelica Houston and Jack Nicholson for the first time since their very public breakup in the late 80s. They have a scene together. They play former husband, former wife, and they have a scene together in a cafe that you can just feel the tension between them and the regret and the sadness. And very, very powerful film. Really, really proved Sean Penn as a director.
Yeah, and he's proven himself quite a few times.
Should have had an Oscar nomination for Into the Wild. Criminal.
No argument here.
Yeah.
1996, we're into Blood and Wine, The Evening Star. Any thoughts on either of those?
Well, he had a busy year. He also made Mars Attacks that year for Tim
Yeah.
Burton, which just awful. Evening
I love
Star.
that movie.
He shows up for about 3 minutes in Evening Star, and the audience went, "Ooh, he's back," and then he did nothing. He was gone, and a throwaway year, really. Blood and Wine is an okay film. He and Michael Caine do some interesting work together, but nobody went to see it. Critics didn't have much good to say about it. It's okay to watch for an essay and two great actors going toe-to-toe, but other than that, I mean, it's not much. 97 was his big comeback with As Good as It Gets.
Yeah, and this movie has one of my favorite Jack Nicholson quotes in it from any film, when he's asked, "How do you write women so well?" And he responds,
I think of a man, and I take away reason and accountability.
Yeah. He was terrific. He plays Melvin Udall, of all things, a romance writer. And he's just a nasty, homophobic, vile character with OCD so bad that he can't step on cracks when he's walking up the street. He has to lock his door so many times. He has to wash his hands constantly with a single bar of soap and then throws it away. Just a nutcase, just a complete nutcase. He must have the same waitress every morning in this restaurant he goes to. And he's in love with her, but he's terrified to approach her. She's played by Helen Hunt. And wonderful performance from Nicholson. He's terrific as Melvin Udall. I never quite got the acclaim for the Helen Hunt performance. She won an Oscar, for God's sake.
Yeah.
But her accent's all over the place. And it's really? They're going to give her an Oscar? Nicholson was nominated that year, and I think the true winner should have been Robert Duvall for The Apostle. But Jack is beloved. And, when Nicholson's nominated for a box office hit, there's a pretty good chance he's going to win. And win he did. And it's tough to argue. You watch the movie and you smile all the way through it. You're right. That quote he gives about women is perfect and perfectly sums up his character. He's a prick. And he enjoys being a prick. He can't believe it himself when he babysits the gay neighbor's dog and he falls in love with the dog. He can't believe that he likes the little dog. So a good film.
There's an element in there, I think, of Ebenezer Scrooge. It's this guy who you fucking hate, right? And then you kind of start to like him.
Well, that great scene at the end where Greg Kinnear and he come back after the road trip, and he's moved all Greg Kinnear's stuff into his extra room. This is a guy who can't be around people and who's never allowed anybody into his apartment, but he's going to let this gay man who he's tormented live with them. And Greg Kinnear's character says to him, Melvin, I really love you. And he looks at him and says, buddy, if that did it for me, I'd be the happiest guy on earth.
Yeah.
So he's changing. He's evolving. And again, a great Nicholson performance. Nothing negative can be said of it. But I really did struggle with Helen Hunt winning the Oscar with him.
I'm with you on that. I think Greg Kinnear was pretty brilliant.
He was, and a complete surprise. Where'd that come from? And he's never done anything that good again.
Yeah. Nicholson would not be seen for a few years after winning this Oscar.
He took a long break, didn't he?
Yeah, nothing until 2001 in a movie, again, directed by Sean Penn. I know you're a fan of The Pledge.
I think it's one of his best performances. I was shocked he wasn't nominated for Best Actor. He plays a cop who makes a promise to a woman to find the killer of her child. And when he retires and buys a gas station, he hasn't forgotten that promise. He's still watching a guy. And he takes up with a young mother, played by Robin Wright. They move in together. And he actually uses her child as bait to try to catch the killer. And at the end of the film, he's gone mad. He's gone off the deep end because he's never got this killer and lost so much. And an incredible cast: Benicio del Toro, Mickey Rourke, Robin Wright, Patricia Clarkson, just a wonderful cast, but anchored completely by Nicholson. Believable, lived in, stunning piece of acting. And he's not nominated. I couldn't believe it.
Some ignoramuses have accused Nicholson of being a one-trick pony, and I think one of the best examples to refute that is the 2002 film about Schmidt.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When he read the script, the first thing he said was comb over. I've got to do a comb over.
Mm.
And that's just what he did. Warren Schmidt is a quiet, henpecked little shrew of a man who on the last day of work sits and watches the clock tick down the final minutes, goes to his retirement party that night and really doesn't want to be there. And he's retired for about a week and his wife dies and he falls apart. He doesn't know what he's going to do with his life. He knows one thing. He's got to prevent his daughter from marrying this bonehead of a boyfriend. And that's what he sets out to do. And nothing he's really done seems to have given him purpose except one thing. He sponsored a child in Africa or South America and gets letters and drawings from the child. And at the end of the film, when he goes back to this big empty house, a stack of mail, having failed to convince his daughter not to marry, he sits down and reads a letter from the woman that takes care of this boy. And he realizes this is his purpose, that he can give something to this child that really costs him nothing. And he bursts into tears. And we've so rarely seen Jack Nicholson sob on screen. And yet at the end of About Schmidt, that's exactly what he does. He was nominated for his Oscar. I don't know how he didn't win this year. This was Daniel Day-Lewis's year for Gangs of New York. I know that. I think Nicholson was better. I think he deserved it.
And who won?
Adrian Brody in The Pianist.
Right. We've been talking about uncut gems recently. Adam Sandler can do some pretty brilliant work as an actor. He can also make some movies that are absolutely fucking terrible. So where does anger management fall?
I think somewhere in the middle. I think he learned how to be an actor working with Nicholson. He was very good the year before in Punch Drunk Love,
Yes.
directed by Paul Thomas Anderson. But I think he really learned how to become an actor and how to modulate what he does well and what he doesn't does well watching Nicholson. Nicholson is a little over the top in this movie, but it works. It absolutely works for his character. And I think he bounced off Sandler quite nicely. And they really enjoyed working together, which says a lot about Adam Sandler. Jack Nicholson does not suffer fools. If he doesn't care to work with somebody, they don't work together again, ever. So the fact that he worked with Sandler and said publicly that he enjoyed it speaks volumes. The movie was a massive hit at the box office, and critics were split. They loved Jack, they hated Adam, which I thought was unkind and unfair, because I thought Adam was terrific in the movie. I thought Nicholson was okay, not his best, not about Schmidt level, but he had a good time. I enjoyed it.
So worth a watch.
Yeah, you know what? It's one of those movies. I say this about summer blockbusters. You take your brain out, you put it in the fridge, you watch the movie, you put your brain back in when it's over. You're never going to think about it. I never think about anger management until this moment.
All right, fair enough.
Thought about it in 10 years, easily 10 years.
I am a big fan of Nancy Meyers.
I know you are.
A friend once said to me, Nick, why do you love movies that appeal to middle-aged women? And I said, I don't know. But I love her films, and something's got to give. Nicholson, Diane Keaton, Amanda Peet, Jon Favreau's got a small role in it. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. We can talk all the shit we want to about Keanu Reeves. I think he pulls it off in this one.
I do too. First of all, I can answer your question as to why you like Nancy Meyers' film. Deep down, you're a hopeless romantic. Whether you will ever admit that or not, deep down you are.
I'll admit
that's that, yeah. And that's the great appeal of her movies. They appeal to romantics. I enjoy her films too. I don't think as much as you do, but I certainly do. I love this one. I think this is her best work. And I think she had two actors working at the absolute top of their game who had extraordinary chemistry and built a film around Keaton's character and allowed her to just cut loose. She's wonderful in this movie, just dominates it. And Nicholson is equally good, but he doesn't dominate it like she does until the last third when he's trying to get back with her. You're not wrong about Keanu Reeves. He's I've never thought much of him as an actor. I've interviewed him. I never thought he was terribly bright, but I've changed that opinion a little bit. I think he's very shy, and he's probably the most unspeakably generous individual that I've ever met. He lives in a hotel. He donates most of his money. He paid for his sister's leukemia treatment unsuccessfully. She passed. An interesting, brave guy. And a lot of people like to work with him. So that says a lot. That speaks volumes about him. Nicholson and Keaton both really enjoyed their time with him. They said he was a delight to have on the set. And that says a lot. So something's got to give. Got an Oscar nomination for Keaton. There were a lot of howls of protest when Nicholson wasn't nominated. One of those movies where I think he was playing himself more than anything else, and he had a good time doing it. But I was happy she was nominated, and it got that attention. Made a lot of money, made a lot of people happy.
Yeah, and he is funny in some of those scenes. Like,
Oh, he is. He's great.
how does your chest feel? Like an elephant sitting on it. Like,
yeah. And the panic when they suggest if you've taken Viagra, it may get worse. And he loses his mind briefly because of course he's taken Viagra. He's old.
Yeah. I just have to again, mentioning Keanu Reeves, I kind of like to root for him because knowing the kind of guy he is. I've always thought, like, in The Matrix, in John Wick, he's good in the right kind of role. He was fucking atrocious in Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Yep.
But in this, he's playing a medical doctor with a couple of heavy hitters, and I think he pulls it off. So, good for him. He's no Johnny Depp or something like that, but
you know what he does well? He looks good in black. He's a good-looking guy. He hits his mark. He does his job. He says his lines. He tells the truth. You can't ask for any more. You can't ask for any more than that.
Yeah, and I think he knows his limitations.
I do too. I think he learned them. A lot of hard knocks learning them. But I'll tell you, one movie where he made me laugh senseless was Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. I giggled like a little girl watching that movie. It was hysterical.
They're making a third one right now.
I know. Can't wait.
Toy Story 4, man. Duke Kaboom.
Yep. He was terrific.
All right, Keanu's a subject for another podcast, but it's time to get down to brass tacks here because we're about to talk about a movie that's one of my favorites. And I know you also love it. 2006 marked the first meeting of Martin Scorsese and Jack Nicholson in a little film called The Departed.
What's interesting about The Departed is that Nicholson didn't want to do it. He first read the script and he said, there's nothing in there I haven't done before. And he wanted to work with Scorsese. He wanted to work with DiCaprio and Damon. The only way he would agree to do it was that if Scorsese would allow him to improvise. And there's two schools of thoughts on this now. There's one is that that's truly what he wanted, and I happen to believe that. But there's also rumors floating that he'd begun to lose his memory and his ability to learn lines, and improvising was easier for him, which I tend to believe part of that one too. But it didn't matter because his performance as Frank Costello was absolutely chilling. This was a guy who you just didn't know what was going to happen next. And the prop guys used to go to DiCaprio and Damon and they said, okay, he's got a knife, he's got a gun, and he's got a dildo. And we don't know which one he's going to use, so be ready. And they had to be ready. And you can see the genuine shock on their faces and fright in their faces when he pulls out these things over the course of the movie. He's the absolute center of the movie. He is insidious as Frank Costello, pure evil, and yet you can't take your eyes off him. He comes out of the kitchen in a bar at one point with his hands covered in blood all over his shirt. We have no clue what's going on in back, but we got a pretty good idea just by looking at him that it ain't good. And electrifying throughout. A brilliant movie to begin with. DiCaprio, one of his best performances. Damon is terrific. Martin Sheen, Alec Baldwin, Mark Wahlberg. But this movie belongs to Nicholson. And that he wasn't nominated for an Academy Award was scandalous. The Golden Globes nominated him. And they never get anything right, but they nominated him. And the Academy didn't. And it's a shame that this wasn't his last movie because the two films he made after this are awful. But had he gone out with The Departed, he would have gone out on top.
There's a scene where he's eating breakfast and he picks up a severed hand
Yeah.
bag, and then he takes the wedding ring off, gives it to French, and says, "And send this to his wife."
Yep. He's got a great scene at the beginning of the film where he and Frenchie kill a couple on the beach. And he shoots the woman and he looks at Frenchie and says, "She fell funny." And you think, my God, what kind of mind is this? You know, just a dangerous guy.
And you know what? Like, it doesn't even bother me that he just kind of randomly starts digging into that Boston accent. It's not the most consistent, but I mean, he is absolutely terrifying.
Yeah. Yeah, he's great. He's great. I love how calm he is at the beginning of the movie when he's teaching Damon. And Damon is a child saying, I don't want to be a product of my society. I want my society to be a product of me. And you just know what kind of guy this is and where he's going to take this kid. And boy, he takes him.
It's baffling that, as good as he is, the only actor nominated for an Oscar was Mark Wahlberg.
And Wahlberg was terrific. You know, it was a great performance. But, you know, DiCaprio should have been nominated for this instead of Blood Diamond. I think Damon should have been a nominee as well for Best Actor, and Nicholson for supporting. Martin Sheen could have been a supporting actor as well. He was wonderful. But yeah, the only nomination it got was Wahlberg, and I don't know what happened.
Yeah, just an absolute. I agree. I honestly think it. Well, I mean, he's done some great stuff since, but it's one of DiCaprio's most brilliant performances.
Absolutely. Oh God, and Damon, he's terrific.
Vera Farmiga is also great.
Yes, she is. She's great in everything.
Yeah, that's true. So yeah, well, you mentioned the two movies he's made since. We might as well talk about them.
The bucket list. I'm watching the bucket list and I'm thinking, what a different movie it would have been had Morgan Freeman played the Nicholson part and Nicholson played the blue collar guy, because he's rarely done that, you know. But as the rich, smarmy, womanizing doctor, or the owner of all these hospitals, we've seen him do this 1,000 times. And Morgan Freeman, the salt of the earth type of guy, we've seen that 1,000 times from him. What if they'd switched? That would have been an interesting film. That would have been watchable and different and would have challenged both of them. And I've often wondered if it was discussed. I wonder if Rob Reiner presented it to them and they discussed switching. But what a shame that didn't happen, because as it is, it's a sentimental piece of tripe. You know, there's nothing remotely interesting in the movie. Nicholson and Freeman are good together, but I mean, how can they not be? They're two of the greatest actors in the world. How can they not be at least good? But they could have been great. And it could have been a sensational movie about two dying men spending their last time together seeing the world. And I wish they'd gone further. I really wish they'd switch characters.
I had never considered that, and that's actually very, very intriguing. Yeah, I can't. That could have made a huge difference. Another issue with this movie, to get a little bit personal, you and I both have experience with cancer, with your wife and my father, and it just seems like a very, very unrealistic portrayal.
Well, yeah, you and I know that cancer is punishing. And these two guys are in the hospital, horribly sick, going through radiation and chemo. And then they're off touring the world and they have little bouts of sickness, but it's like the flu.
Yeah.
And that doesn't happen. Cancer punishes you. It's horrible. And in a lot of cases, they won't let you fly. My wife couldn't fly. Now, she had brain cancer, but she wasn't permitted to get on an airplane with that. So, you know, there's some real stretches of the imagination to watch this movie and go with this movie. And some of the location shots were awful because they weren't there. It was screens and we
bad CGI.
Yeah, really bad CGI.
Yeah.
The skydiving scene where their faces were planted on skydivers. My God.
Yeah, a lot of missed opportunities in the bucket list.
Yeah. And, you know, Rob Reiner, I liked Rob Reiner as a director when he was coming up. Stand By Me is one of the great films made about childhood. A Few Good Men is a terrific movie. He's done some legitimately great work. And then he makes this. And oh, God. Sappy, sentimental junk.
The last film that Nicholson made was How Do You Know?
Yeah, and again, a missed opportunity. James L. Brooks, who is a legitimately great filmmaker. Um, I don't know. I don't know why Jack was in this. I don't know what he was thinking. To begin, I don't know why he'd make a movie with Reese Witherspoon in it. I would run for cover rather than do that. Paul Rudd is okay as his son, but Nicholson really plays a complete bastard in the movie and doesn't even do it well. You know, he seems to phone it in. And I don't know why he made the film. He's notorious for being very picky about his scripts, but he makes this? I mean, really, did he do it as a favor to Jim Brooks? Jim Brooks? Probably, but he shouldn't have.
Nicholson's 82 now. You think we're done seeing anything from him?
I do, unfortunately. There's all kinds of rumors floating around. There's rumors of Alzheimer's. There's rumors that he just doesn't want to work anymore. There's rumors his memory is bad. There's rumors that he has cystic fibrosis. There's all kinds of rumors floating. I don't know if any of them are true. I've seen photographs of him where he does not look good. He looks unkept and like he just rolled out of bed. Rumor has it Warren Beatty and Annette Bening go to his house every day to check on him. It must be a terrible thing to be 82 years old, $450 million in the bank, and no one to share it with. You know, he has children. I don't know if he sees them or not. What a horrible, horrible end of life to one of the greatest actors in the history of the movies.
Well, his legacy on film is certainly secure, but...
And that's the greatest thing. Film is immortal. So Jack Nicholson is immortal. And hopefully anybody that hasn't heard of him will Google him and go back and watch his art, because he was among the best. He might have been the best.
Do you see any actors who you could consider successors to Nicholson?
I think there's a lot of great young actors coming up. Paul Rudd actually has a lot of Nicholson's sensibility to him. I'm not sure he has the depth of Nicholson yet. We don't really know. Adam Sandler this year with Uncut Gems gave the kind of performance Nicholson or Pacino would have given in the 1970s. So they're out there. They're absolutely out there. There's always going to be other actors coming in to take the places of the greats that go on. But there's only one Jack. There'll only ever be one Jack.
I am trying desperately quickly find confirmation and source this, but I know somewhere I read that Nicholson himself considered Jim Carrey to be the Jack Nicholson of his generation.
He really likes Jim Carrey. He thinks that Jim Carrey is a great actor, as do I, and that Jim Carrey was robbed of an Oscar nomination for Man in the Moon. And again, I concur. Yeah, I can't argue that. He was terrific.
I agree 100% on those points. And yeah, Jim Carrey has never been nominated for an Oscar, but he's a local boy, and he is 100. Jim Carrey is 100% the reason I wanted to become an actor.
There's a wonderful documentary on Netflix called Jim and Andy.
The Great Bloodhound.
It's behind the scenes footage of the making of Man on the Moon. And I don't think people know how committed Jim Carrey was to being Andy Kaufman.
Yeah.
I mean, he did everything that Andy Kaufman did making that film, to the extent that the actors who played themselves in Taxi said, "My God, it's like he's alive again." And they were pissed. They were not happy with Jim Carrey's antics, nor was the director Milos Forman. He said, "We never know who's going to show up today. Is it going to be Jim? Is it going to be Andy? Is it going to be Tony Clifton?" And yet his performance was just spectacular. And Nicholson was one of his biggest fans for that film, one of his biggest champions.
Yeah, there was a famous, or rather infamous, altercation between Jim Carrey and Jerry Lawler, the wrestler.
Right.
Yeah, I saw that documentary, and he went like Daniel Day-Lewis method on this, which, because of the kind of guy Andy Kaufman was, made it a fucking nightmare for everybody he was around.
Well, he lost himself completely. Jim Carrey was gone, and he was Andy Kaufman, and Andy Kaufman was not a stable dude. So they had to they had a lot to do to get that movie made.
Well, that'll be a subject for another podcast.
Could be.
Well, thanks for joining me. I think we've covered everything, unless you've got something else you want to bring up.
No, other than if there are people out there who don't know the early work of Jack Nicholson, I urge you to go back to the 70s and 80s and see it, experience it, because he's probably done making movies, and to see his work is to see absolutely one of the greatest actors of all time at work, and you're doing yourself a favor by watching it.
And to all our listeners, remember, any film you haven't seen is a new experience.
Absolutely.
There you have it, folks. Episode 5, all jacked up. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to check out all of our content online at www.footandfriendsonfilm.com. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all that wonderful stuff. Be sure to check out our YouTube channel and click subscribe for this and future episodes of our podcast. Got a lot of cool stuff coming up. We're going to be giving you full coverage of the Academy Awards, which are just around the corner. John and I are going to be talking about the 1970s as a decade, and we're going to do an episode which is a flipped interview. John's going to ask me the questions. That one will focus on the superhero genre. Until next time, see you at the movies.